Sarah Chen stares at the handwritten letter on her kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she reads words that should be impossible. I saw you cry in the hospital bathroom after your mother's diagnosis. I saw you give your last $20 to that homeless veteran. I saw you choose forgiveness when your heart screamed for revenge. The apartment door is still locked. The windows are sealed shut. Yet somehow, these letters keep appearing, each one revealing moments she thought she'd hidden from the world, tears she'd swallowed in silence, acts of kindness she'd never told another soul about. Sarah thought she was invisible, just another face lost in the crowd of a broken world. But someone has been watching. Someone has been counting every sacrifice, cataloging every moment of pain she's endured in silence. The question isn't just who's been leaving these letters, it's why they've chosen now to reveal themselves. What Sarah doesn't know is that her mysterious correspondent isn't just anyone. There's someone whose life she saved without ever knowing it. Someone who's been repaying an impossible debt. But when she discovers the truth, will it heal her wounds or break her heart forever? The paper feels expensive beneath her fingertips, cream-colored with a subtle watermark that catches the dim morning light filtering through her blinds. The handwriting is elegant, careful, each letter formed with the precision of someone who still believes words matter. Sarah sets the letter down and wraps her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the August heat that makes her studio apartment feel like a furnace. This is the third letter in 2 weeks. The first had appeared on her nightstand while she slept, describing the night she'd held her dying father's hand and promised him she'd take care of everyone he was leaving behind. The second had been tucked under her coffee mug that morning, somehow placed there while she'd showered, detailing the exact moment she'd decided not to jump from the Riverside Bridge last winter. No one knew about that moment. No one. Sarah walks to her front door and examines the locks again, all 3 of them, installed after her ex-boyfriend's increasingly desperate attempts to talk things through had escalated to breaking and entering. The chain is still in place, the deadbolt secure, the door handle lock intact. She checks the windows for the 4th time this morning, running her fingers along the frames, looking for any sign of tampering. Nothing. Her reflection stares back from the window glass, hollow-eyed, sharp-boned from too many skipped meals, dark hair pulled into the same messy bun she's worn to her data entry job for the past 8 months. She looks like what she is, a 28-year-old woman who's been ground down by circumstances until she's barely a shadow of who she used to be. The letter mentions her mother's diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, discovered 3 months ago when her mom finally went to the doctor about that persistent stomachache she'd been ignoring. Sarah had been the one to drive her to the appointment, the one sitting in the sterile waiting room when Dr. Martinez delivered the news, the one who'd excused herself afterward to vomit in the small bathroom down the hall while her mother sat in stunned silence. She'd cried in that bathroom, sobbed, actually, great heaving breaths that she'd muffled with paper towels, while her mother waited for her to return with the strength to ask all the right questions about treatment options and prognosis and what comes next. The homeless veteran is Marcus, who sits outside the grocery store on 5th Street with a cardboard sign and kind eyes. Last week, Sarah had been down to her last $20 before payday, but she'd seen him sharing his sandwich with a stray dog and couldn't walk past without giving him something. And the forgiveness, that cuts deepest of all. Because whoever wrote this letter knows about David, knows about the other woman, knows about the humiliation of finding them together in the bed Sarah had helped David pick out for their shared apartment. They know about the moment she'd chosen to walk away instead of destroying his things, chosen silence instead of telling everyone in their social circle what kind of man he really was. Sarah picks up the letter again, studying the handwriting for clues. It could be a man's or a woman's. The script is too controlled to reveal much personality. There's no signature, no return address, nothing that might hint at the identity of her mysterious observer. The thought that someone has been watching her most private moments should terrify her. It should send her running to the police, or at least to her sister Emma, who would know what to do. Instead, Sarah finds herself strangely comforted by the idea that her pain hasn't gone completely unnoticed, that someone, somewhere, has been keeping track of the small ways she's tried to remain human in a world that seems designed to strip humanity away. She folds the letter carefully and places it with the other two in the shoebox under her bed. Then she starts her coffee and wonders what tomorrow's letter might reveal. The letter sat on Elena's kitchen counter for 3 days, untouched except for her nervous glances as she passed by with her morning coffee. She'd moved it there after finding herself staring at it obsessively from her bed, the elegant handwriting seeming to pulse with secrets in the dim light filtering through her blinds. On Thursday morning, exhaustion finally outweighed paranoia. She'd barely slept, jumping at every creak of the old building, every footstep in the hallway above. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed hollow eyes and skin pale as parchment. The woman staring back looked like a ghost of herself, which seemed fitting given the circumstances. Elena picked up the letter with trembling fingers and read it again, hoping she'd imagined the impossible intimacy of its contents. But there it was, written in that careful script, every detail of her private ritual, every broken prayer she'd whispered in the darkness of her bedroom. The words made her stomach clench with a mixture of violation and something else she couldn't name, a strange comfort in being truly seen, even by someone who had no right to watch. She called in sick to work, knowing her voice would betray her if she tried to maintain normalcy. Instead, she spent the morning checking every lock, every window, searching for signs of entry. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a converted Victorian, accessible only through the main entrance, or the fire escape outside her bedroom window. Both seemed secure, untampered with. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was a sweet elderly woman who'd given Elena only one key when she moved in 6 months ago after David's death. After David's death. Even thinking the phrase made her chest tighten. She'd chosen this place specifically because it was small, anonymous, somewhere she could disappear without anyone asking questions about why she never smiled anymore or why she'd lost 20 pounds since the funeral. The search of her apartment yielded nothing except dust bunnies and the growing certainty that whoever had written the letter possessed an almost supernatural knowledge of her private moments. Unless someone had installed cameras so sophisticated they were invisible, she couldn't fathom how they'd captured such intimate details. Elena made herself a cup of tea and sat at her small dining table, staring out at the tree-lined street below. Normal people walked by, a mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking his terrier, teenagers laughing over shared earbuds. Their ordinariness felt surreal, as if she were watching them through glass from another dimension where mysterious letters didn't appear overnight and dead husbands stayed properly buried in the past. The rational part of her mind, the part trained in legal research and logical thinking, suggested practical explanations. A neighbor with a clear view into her apartment, someone with access to her therapy records, though Dr. Martinez had assured her of strict confidentiality, a cruel prank by someone who knew her history, though she'd been careful to avoid friendships since moving here. But none of these explanations felt adequate for the tenderness in those written words. Whoever had watched her pray wasn't mocking her pain. They were witnessing it with something that felt disturbingly like love. That afternoon, Elena forced herself to leave the apartment for groceries, if only to prove she wasn't completely losing her grip on reality. The mundane act of choosing apples and checking expiration dates on milk cartons helped ground her in the physical world. She caught herself scanning faces in the checkout line, wondering if any of them could be her mysterious correspondent. The tired cashier with kind eyes, the businessman impatiently checking his phone, the maintenance worker buying energy drinks and cigarettes, they all seemed equally likely and impossible. Walking home with her grocery bags, Elena noticed things she'd previously overlooked. The coffee shop across from her building had large windows with a clear view of her fire escape. The apartment building next door was close enough that someone with binoculars could see into her bedroom if she forgot to close the blinds. The old oak tree outside her window had branches thick enough to support a person, though the climb would be treacherous. Back in her apartment, She pulled all the curtains closed and turned on every lamp, banishing shadows. The letter still lay on her counter, and beside it, she now noticed something that made her blood freeze. A small white envelope that hadn't been there when she left. This one bore her name in the same elegant handwriting, but something about the paper felt different, heavier, more expensive. Her hands shook as she opened it, and a photograph fell out along with another folded note. The photograph was of her and David on their honeymoon in Santorini, laughing on a hotel balcony overlooking the sea. She'd kept only one copy of this picture, hidden in a jewelry box she hadn't opened since packing his things away. The note contained just one line: "He would want you to forgive yourself." Elena sank to her knees on the kitchen floor, clutching the photograph and sobbing with a grief she thought she'd learned to control. The letter sat on Maya's kitchen counter like a venomous snake. Its words burned into her memory, even though she'd hidden it beneath a stack of unpaid bills. 3 days had passed since she'd found it, and she hadn't slept more than an hour at a stretch. Every creak of the old building, every shadow that shifted across her walls, sent her heart racing. She'd changed the locks, called the landlord, even convinced herself to file a police report, though Officer Martinez had looked at her with that mixture of pity and skepticism she'd grown accustomed to since David's death. "No signs of forced entry," he'd said, scanning her cramped apartment. "You sure you didn't write this yourself? Sometimes grief makes people do strange things." Maya had wanted to scream. Instead, she'd nodded and thanked him for his time, adding his dismissal to the growing list of reasons why she trusted no one. Now, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Her dark hair hung limp and unwashed, and purple shadows ringed her eyes like bruises. She looked exactly like what she was, someone barely holding on. The knock at her door made her freeze, toothbrush halfway to her mouth. 3 soft raps, then silence. Maya crept to the peephole, her bare feet silent on the cold hardwood. The hallway was empty, lit only by the flickering fluorescent light that the super kept promising to fix. She waited 5 full minutes before unlocking the deadbolt. The envelope lay on her doormat like an offering. This time, her name was written in elegant script across cream-colored paper. Not the same handwriting as before. This was flowing, feminine, almost romantic. Maya's hands shook as she carried it inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. "My dearest Maya, you've been looking over your shoulder, haven't you? Checking locks, jumping at shadows. I understand your fear, but please know that you are not in danger. You have never been in danger, not from me. I've been watching you struggle, watching you blame yourself for things beyond your control. The night David died, you wore the blue dress he bought you for your anniversary. You changed clothes 3 times before deciding on it, wanting to look perfect for him. You had no way of knowing what would happen. But I want you to know something the police never told you. David's last words weren't the groans of pain you heard. After you ran to call for help, after you thought he couldn't speak anymore, he whispered your name. He said, 'Tell Maya it wasn't her fault.' The paramedics heard him. I made sure of that. But sometimes the living are too proud to deliver messages from the dead. You are not responsible for his heart attack, Maya. You never were. With love and protection, The letter fluttered to the floor as Maya's knees gave out. She collapsed against the door, sobs ripping from her chest like physical wounds. David's last words. After 18 months of drowning in guilt, of replaying every moment of that terrible night, someone was telling her the one thing she desperately needed to hear. But how could they know? The paramedics had never mentioned any last words. She'd asked them directly, begged them to tell her if David had said anything, and they'd shaken their heads with professional sympathy. Unless... Maya scrambled for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she'd saved but never called. EMT Rachel Chen had given Maya her card that night, had squeezed her hand and told her to reach out if she ever needed anything. "Chen, this is Maya Sullivan. You responded to a call 18 months ago. My husband, David Sullivan, had a heart attack." A pause. "Maya, I remember. How are you holding up?" I need to ask you something. Maya's voice cracked. Did David say anything before he died? Anything at all? The silence stretched so long, Maya thought the call had dropped. Maya, Rachel's voice was careful. We talked about this at the hospital. I told you, please, I need the truth. Another pause. He did say your name, near the end, and something else, but it was so faint. Rachel sighed. Look, I wanted to tell you, but my partner said it would just make things harder. David said it wasn't your fault. He made me promise to tell you, but when I saw how destroyed you were, I thought maybe. Maya ended the call, her phone clattering across the floor. Someone had known about David's last words. Someone had cared enough about her peace of mind to share them. But that same someone had been watching her, studying her, cataloging her most private moments. Maya picked up the letter again, studying the signature A. Not just anyone. Someone who claimed to love and protect her. Someone who had access to information that had been deliberately kept from her. As she read the letter again, one phrase stood out like a blazing neon sign. I made sure of that. Not I happened to know or I heard about it. I made sure. The coffee shop on 5th Street had always been Maya's sanctuary. A place where she could disappear into the steady hum of conversation and the comforting ritual of her morning latte. But today, even surrounded by the familiar chaos of clinking cups and muffled laughter, she felt exposed, like every patron could see the invisible target painted on her back. She'd barely slept after finding the second letter, her mind cycling through possibilities that ranged from logical to terrifying. A neighbor with access to her building, an ex-boyfriend she'd forgotten about, someone from work who'd developed an unhealthy obsession. The rational explanations felt thin, gossamer threads that couldn't support the weight of what was really happening. You look like hell, said a voice beside her. Maya looked up to find Detective Sarah Chen sliding into the opposite seat, her sharp eyes taking inventory of Maya's rumpled clothes and dark circles. They'd known each other since college, back when Sarah was studying criminal justice and Maya was drowning in literature courses, both of them bonding over late-night coffee runs and shared cynicism about romance. Thanks for the ego boost, Maya muttered, wrapping her hands around her cup. What are you doing here? Same thing you are, apparently. Caffeinating before facing another day of human disappointment. Sarah signaled the barista for her usual black coffee. Though you look like you're facing something worse than disappointment. What's going on? Maya hesitated. She'd called Sarah the night before, then hung up before it connected, unsure how to explain something that sounded like the plot of a psychological thriller. But looking at her friend's concerned face, the words tumbled out. Someone's been leaving letters in my apartment, personal letters, about things no one should know. Sarah's expression shifted, the casual warmth replaced by professional interest. What kind of things? Private moments. Conversations I had with David before he died. Things I did when I thought I was alone. Maya's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Sarah, they know about the night I almost... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The night you almost what? Maya stared into her coffee, remembering that terrible evening 3 months after David's funeral when she'd stood on her fire escape, calculating the distance to the concrete below. She'd never told anyone about that moment, not even her therapist. Nothing. It doesn't matter. But Sarah was already leaning forward, her detective instincts fully engaged. Maya, this is stalking at minimum, potentially breaking and entering. Do you still have the letters? At home. We're going to get them, and then you're filing a report. No arguments. 20 minutes later, they stood in Maya's apartment while Sarah examined the first letter through a plastic bag, her expression growing more serious with each line. This level of detail suggests long-term surveillance, Sarah said, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. Either someone's been watching you for months, or they have access to information about your relationship with David that should be private. Where's the second one? Maya retrieved it from her bedside table, watching as Sarah's frown deepened. Maya, This isn't just about knowing your secrets. Look at the tone, the way they're written. This person thinks they're protecting you, caring for you. That makes them more unpredictable. Protecting me from what? From yourself, apparently. Sarah pointed to a line in the second letter that Maya had tried to forget. I won't let you disappear into that darkness again, not when you have so much light left to give. The words sent ice through Maya's veins. They were watching that night. On the fire escape. What happened on the fire escape? Maya sank onto a couch, the weight of the secret finally too much to carry alone. After David died, I went through this period where I couldn't see the point of anything. One night, I was out there and I was thinking about how easy it would be to just step off. But then I heard this voice calling my name from the street. And when I looked down, there was this man standing under the streetlight. He was too far away to see clearly, but something about seeing another person snapped me out of it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Did you ever see this man again? No. I convinced myself I'd imagined him, that my brain had created what I needed to hear. But now you think he was real. I think he's been real this whole time. Maya gestured at the letters. I think he's been watching me ever since, convinced he saved my life, and that gives him the right to monitor everything I do. Sarah pulled out her phone. I'm calling this in. We need to dust for prints. Check your building's security cameras. Interview your neighbors. As Sarah spoke to dispatch, Maya stared out her window at the street below, wondering if somewhere in the maze of windows and doorways, her mysterious guardian was watching even now, perhaps composing his next revelation about the life he thought he owned. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under pale sunlight. Maya sat at her kitchen table, the 4 letters spread before her like tarot cards promising revelations she wasn't sure she wanted. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Each letter was written in the same elegant script, on cream-colored paper that felt expensive between her fingers. The handwriting was neither masculine nor feminine, flowing with a practiced grace that spoke of careful cultivation. She'd spent the night analyzing every curve and flourish, searching for clues that might reveal her mysterious correspondent's identity. The first letter had appeared 3 weeks ago, slipped under her door while she was at work. It had mentioned her habit of talking to her plants, something she'd never told anyone. The second had arrived 5 days later, describing the exact moment she'd cried in the grocery store cereal aisle, overwhelmed by the simple act of choosing between brands. The third had detailed her recurring nightmare about drowning in her childhood swimming pool. But yesterday's letter had crossed a line that made her skin crawl with recognition and violation. You were wearing your mother's yellow dress the night David left. You stood at the window for 3 hours after his car disappeared, touching the fabric and remembering how she used to dance in the kitchen wearing it. You haven't worn yellow since... Maya's hands trembled as she reread the words. The yellow dress was packed away in a storage box, buried beneath winter coats she never wore. David had been gone for 8 months now, their relationship another casualty of her inability to let anyone too close. But that night, that specific terrible night, when she'd worn her mother's dress like armor, no one could have known about that. No one had been there. She'd checked and double-checked her apartment's security. The landlord swore only 2 keys existed, hers and his emergency backup, which hung in his office safe. The windows were too high and faced an empty courtyard. Her neighbors were strangers who nodded politely in hallways but never lingered for conversation. Yet someone was watching. Someone who knew things that existed only in the private chambers of her heart. The intercom buzzer made her jump, sending the letters scattering across the table. She gathered them quickly, her pulse racing as she approached the speaker. Maya? It's Sarah from downstairs. I have your package. Relief flooded through her. Sarah Chen lived in 4B and worked from home doing freelance graphic design. They'd exchanged pleasantries a handful of times, and Sarah occasionally accepted deliveries when Maya was at the office. Coming down, Maya called back, grateful for any excuse to leave her apartment and the suffocating weight of unanswered questions. Sarah met her in the lobby. holding a small Amazon box and wearing paint-splattered overalls that suggested a creative morning. She was younger than Maya by at least 5 years, with short black hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "This came yesterday afternoon," Sarah said, handing over the package. "I was going to bring it up, but I got caught up in a project deadline. Thank you so much. You didn't have to." "Actually," Sarah interrupted, then paused as if reconsidering her words. "Can I ask you something? It might sound weird." Maya's stomach clenched. "What is it? Have you noticed anything strange lately? In the building, I mean. I've been hearing footsteps in the hallways at odd hours. And yesterday I could have sworn I saw someone on the fire escape outside your floor. But when I looked again, nobody was there." The package nearly slipped from Maya's hands. "What time yesterday?" "Around 6 in the evening. I was taking a break from work, looking out my window, and I saw this shadow moving along the fire escape. It was probably nothing, maybe a cat or the way the light was hitting the metal bars, but it seemed..." Sarah shrugged apologetically. "Person-shaped. 6 o'clock. Maya had been at the grocery store at 6, buying ingredients for a dinner she'd ultimately been too anxious to cook. Someone could have been at her window, looking in, seeing the letters she'd left on her kitchen table. "Did you get a good look at them?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not really. Just a glimpse before they were gone." "Should I have called the police?" No. You're probably right about it being nothing." The lie tasted bitter, but Maya couldn't bring herself to voice her fears to a relative stranger, no matter how concerned Sarah seemed. They parted ways in the lobby, but as Maya climbed the stairs back to her apartment, she felt exposed, vulnerable. Her sanctuary had been breached, and the person responsible was close enough to watch from fire escapes, to slip letters under doors, to catalogue her every private moment. Back in her apartment, she deadbolted the door and checked every window lock twice. The letters still lay scattered on her kitchen table, waiting with their impossible knowledge and elegant threats. Somewhere in the city, her watcher was planning the next revelation. The morning light felt different streaming through Elena's windows, less forgiving somehow. She sat at her kitchen table, the 4 letters spread before her like tarot cards predicting a future she wasn't sure she wanted to see. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Elena's heart jumped, and she quickly gathered the letters, shoving them into the drawer where she kept her unpaid bills and forgotten warranties. Through the peephole, she saw Marcus shifting his weight from foot to foot, holding 2 coffee cups and what looked like a bakery bag. "You look terrible," he said when she opened the door, though his smile was gentle. "Good morning to you too." Elena stepped aside to let him in, acutely aware of her unwashed hair and yesterday's clothes. "What's this?" "Peace offering. And breakfast. I figured after yesterday." He set the coffee cups on her counter, avoiding her gaze. "I shouldn't have pushed so hard about the letters. It's just, I worry about you living alone, especially with everything you've been through." Elena studied his profile as he unpacked croissants from the bag. Marcus had always been protective of her, even in college when they'd been nothing more than study partners who occasionally grabbed late-night pizza. After David died, Marcus had appeared at her door with groceries and refused to leave until she'd eaten something. She'd been grateful then. Now, something about his concern made her skin crawl. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He turned to face her, leaning against the counter with practiced casualness. "How did you know about David's accident? I mean, specifically how it happened?" The question had been nagging at her since yesterday. She remembered the fog of those first few days after the police visit, the parade of well-meaning friends and relatives. But Marcus had known details about the rain, about the curve in the road, that she was certain she'd never shared. Something flickered across his face, too quick to interpret. "I think you told me. Or maybe it was in the newspaper article?" There wasn't a newspaper article. It was just a minor accident report. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Marcus picked up one of the coffee cups, his movements suddenly careful and deliberate. Elena, you were in shock for weeks. You probably don't remember everything you said or did during that time. She wanted to accept that explanation, to let herself sink back into the comfortable dynamic they'd maintained for 2 years. But the letters had changed, something fundamental in how she saw the world. Someone had been watching her, documenting her private moments, her grief, her breakdown. Someone who cared enough to offer comfort, but chose to remain hidden. The letters mention things no one else knows, she said quietly. Things I've never told another living soul. Marcus set down his cup without drinking from it. When he looked at her, his expression was different, less casual, more intense. What kind of things? That's not the point. The point is someone has been watching me, and I need to figure out who. She paused, studying his face. You don't seem very surprised by any of this, Elena. Actually, you know what? You've been acting strange about this from the beginning. Yesterday, when I showed you the letter, you weren't shocked or confused like a normal person would be. You were worried, like you already knew something. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from their college days when he was trying to work through a difficult problem. I think you're reading too much into, show me your keys. What? Your keys? Show me your key ring. He stared at her for a long moment, then slowly pulled his keys from his pocket. Elena's eyes went immediately to the small silver key she'd never noticed before, identical to the one that opened her apartment door. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. How long? Elena, let me explain. How long have you had a key to my apartment? Marcus's shoulders sagged. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Since David died. You gave it to me, remember? You were afraid to be alone, afraid you might hurt yourself. You made me promise to check on you. She did remember, vaguely, the dark weeks when getting out of bed felt impossible, when Marcus had brought groceries and sat with her while she cried. She'd forgotten about the key, assumed he'd given it back when she'd started functioning again. The letters, Marcus. Did you write them? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her step backward. Not guilt, not shame, but something deeper and more complicated. Something that looked almost like relief. Yes, he said simply. I wrote them. The rain had stopped by the time Maya reached the address scrawled on the crumpled paper. She stood before a modest 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood she'd never visited, its pale yellow siding weathered but well-maintained. Rose bushes lined the front walk, their blooms heavy with moisture from the storm. Her hands trembled as she approached the front door. 3 months ago, she would never have imagined herself standing here, about to confront whoever had been orchestrating the strange dance of letters and revelations that had consumed her life. The woman who answered her knock was perhaps 70, with silver hair pinned back and eyes the color of storm clouds. Maya, the woman said, as if she'd been expecting her. I'm Eleanor. Please come in. The living room felt frozen in time, filled with antique furniture and photographs spanning decades. Maya's attention immediately fixed on the mantelpiece, where a framed photo of a young man in military uniform sat prominently displayed. Something about his face tugged at her memory, but she couldn't place it. You're wondering about David, Eleanor said, following her gaze. My grandson. He would have been 32 next month. Maya's throat constricted. Would have been? Eleanor settled into a worn armchair, gesturing for Maya to take the sofa. He died 18 months ago, a car accident on Highway 9 during that terrible snowstorm in February. The words hit Maya like physical blows. Highway 9, February. The same storm that had nearly claimed her life when her car skidded off the road. The same night, a stranger had pulled her from the wreckage, staying with her until the paramedics arrived. She'd been in shock, barely conscious, but she remembered his voice, calm and reassuring, telling her she was going to be all right. He saved someone that night, Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. A young woman. The police said he was driving her to the hospital when they hit black ice. Maya's world tilted. The room seemed to shrink around her as the implications crashed over her in waves. I was that woman. Eleanor nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. He called me from his cell phone while he was waiting for the ambulance. Told me about this girl he'd found, said she reminded him of someone who needed protecting. Those were among his last words to me. The letters, the intimate knowledge of her life, her struggles, her secrets. Maya's mind raced, trying to piece together what felt impossible. But the letters, how could he know about things that happened after? David was special, Eleanor said, rising to retrieve a wooden box from a side table. Even as a child, he seemed to see things others couldn't. He'd know when I was going to call before the phone rang. He'd show up at my door exactly when I needed him most, even if we hadn't spoken in weeks. She opened the box, revealing stacks of papers covered in familiar handwriting. Maya's breath caught as she recognized the same script from the letters that had been appearing in her apartment. "I found these after the funeral," Eleanor continued. "Pages and pages, all about you. Details about your life, your pain, things he couldn't possibly have known through normal means. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Then the dreams started." "Dreams?" "David, showing me where to leave the letters, telling me what you needed to hear, when you needed to hear it. I know how it sounds, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Eleanor's voice grew stronger, more resolute. "He was worried about you, Maya. Even after death, he couldn't let go of the responsibility he felt." Maya stared at the handwritten pages, her hands shaking as she reached for one. The familiar words seemed to pulse on the page, "You are stronger than your darkest moments." The same message that had appeared in her apartment just days after she'd seriously considered ending her pain permanently. "This is impossible," she whispered, though even as she spoke, she felt the truth of it settling into her bones. The timing of the letters, their uncanny ability to address her exact emotional state, the feeling of being watched over by some benevolent presence, it all crystallized into a reality that defied logic but felt absolutely real. Eleanor reached across the space between them, covering Maya's hand with her own. David was always drawn to broken things. Birds with wounded wings, stray cats, people who'd given up hope. He couldn't save himself in the end, but somehow, he's still trying to save you. Maya looked again at the photograph on the mantelpiece, and suddenly she could see him clearly, the face that had looked down at her with such compassion as she lay trapped in twisted metal and broken glass. The voice that had promised her she wouldn't die alone. The presence that had somehow continued to guide her through the darkest chapters of her grief and recovery. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she asked, her voice breaking. Eleanor squeezed her hand gently. "Live, Maya. That's all he ever wanted. Just live." The coffee shop on Maple Street had become her sanctuary over the past 3 days, a neutral ground where she could think without the weight of her apartment pressing down on her shoulders. Elena sat in the corner booth, her laptop open but untouched, fingers wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. The barista, a young woman with purple hair and kind eyes, had stopped asking if she needed a refill hours ago. She'd been replaying Detective Morrison's words on an endless loop. Someone with intimate access to her life. Someone who knew things that only she should know. The list of possibilities felt impossibly short and terrifyingly long at the same time. Her phone buzzed against the table. A text from her sister Sarah. "Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay?" Elena stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain that mysterious letters were appearing in her apartment, revealing secrets she'd never told anyone? That someone had been watching her, documenting her pain with an accuracy that felt both invasive and strangely comforting? She typed back, "Just busy with work." "I'm fine." The lie came easily, a practiced deflection that had become second nature over the years since David's death. She'd perfected the art of appearing functional while drowning in plain sight. A shadow fell across her table, and Elena looked up to find Marcus Chen standing beside her booth, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Her building superintendent looked different outside the fluorescent-lit hallways of their apartment complex. Younger somehow, less weathered. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, setting one of the cups down in front of her. "You look like you could use some company." Elena's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain the careful distance she kept between herself and the world. But something in his expression, a gentleness she hadn't noticed before, made her nod toward the empty seat across from her. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, wrapping her fingers around the fresh cup. The warmth felt like a small kindness. Marcus settled into the booth, his tool belt clinking softly as he moved. "I've been doing maintenance on the building next door. Saw you through the window." He paused, studying her face. "You've seemed troubled lately, more than usual." The observation should have alarmed her, but instead, Elena found herself oddly grateful that someone had noticed. "It's been a difficult week. Want to talk about it?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena found herself studying Marcus properly for the first time, really looking at him rather than through him. He had intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and his hands, wrapped around his coffee cup, were steady and patient. There was something about his presence that felt safe, undemanding. "Someone's been," she began, then stopped. How could she explain without sounding completely unhinged? "Someone's been leaving things in my apartment, personal things, messages." Marcus's expression didn't change, didn't register the shock or disbelief she'd expected. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his attention entirely focused on her. "What kind of messages?" "Letters, about my life, about things that happened to me, private things that no one else should know." The words tumbled out faster than she'd intended. "The police think it might be someone with access to the building." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, so quickly that Elena almost missed it. A tightening around the corners, a brief pause in his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "That must be terrifying for you." "It should be," Elena said, surprising herself with the admission. "But the strange thing is, the letters aren't threatening. They're almost protective, like whoever's writing them cares about me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. When he looked up again, there was something raw in his expression, something that made Elena's chest tighten with recognition. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "people watch over others because they can't bear the thought of them being alone with their pain." The words hit Elena like a physical force. There was something in the way he said it, not hypothetical but deeply personal. She studied his face, noting the careful way he held himself, the slight tremor in his hands. "Marcus," she said quietly, "is there something you want to tell me?" He met her gaze then, and she saw years of carefully contained emotion threatening to spill over. His lips parted as if he was about to speak, to confess something that would change everything between them. But then his phone rang, shrill and insistent in the quiet coffee shop. The moment shattered like glass. Marcus glanced at the screen and stood abruptly, the warmth in his eyes replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "I have to go," he said, backing away from the table. "Emergency at the building." He was gone before Elena could respond, leaving her alone with 2 cups of coffee and the lingering certainty that she'd been on the verge of discovering something crucial. The rain hammered against Maya's apartment windows as she spread the letters across her coffee table like tarot cards, revealing an unwanted fortune. Each piece of cream-colored paper held fragments of her life she'd never spoken aloud, moments she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself they were nightmares rather than memories. Her hands trembled as she arranged them chronologically, starting with the letter about her 7th birthday, the day her father didn't come home. The precise handwriting described not just his absence, but the way she'd stood at the window counting cars, the specific shade of disappointment that had colored her small world gray, the exact words her mother had whispered while crying in the kitchen. "He promised he'd never leave us like this." No one else knew those words. Maya had been hiding behind the doorframe, invisible in her party dress. The second letter detailed her first kiss at 14, not the sweet fumbling encounter she'd told her friends about, but the real one, the forced one behind the gymnasium that had left her feeling hollow and confused. The letter knew about the taste of copper in her mouth afterward, how she'd scrubbed her lips raw in the school bathroom, how she'd never told anyone because she'd been too ashamed to admit she'd frozen instead of fighting back. As thunder rolled overhead, Maya picked up the most recent letter with shaking fingers. This one was different. The handwriting was less careful, more urgent, as if the writer had been rushed or emotional while crafting it. "Dearest Maya," it began, "I know you're searching for answers, and I can no longer bear watching you suffer in confusion. The truth is both simpler and more complicated than you imagine. I have been with you through every moment described in these letters, not as an observer, but as someone who loves you more than his own existence." Maya's breath caught. His own existence? "I died 3 years ago, on October 15th, at 11:47 p.m. You were there. You held my hand as the machine stopped beeping. You were the last thing I saw in this world, and somehow, impossibly, you became the anchor that kept me tethered to it." The letter slipped from her numb fingers as the date seared through her consciousness. October 15th, the night David died. David, her David, who'd known every story, every scar, every secret fear because she'd trusted him with her whole broken heart. David, who'd made her believe that love could heal everything, right up until the cancer proved them both wrong. With mechanical movements, she retrieved the letter and continued reading. "I don't understand the mechanics of what I've become. I only know that I couldn't let go. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you alone with all that pain, all those buried memories poisoning you from within. I thought if I could show you that someone knew your whole truth and loved you anyway, you might finally forgive yourself for being human." Maya's vision blurred as tears mixed with the incomprehensible reality settling over her. She thought about the past few months, the sensation of being watched, the way objects sometimes seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking, the dreams where she could almost smell his cologne. "I know this sounds impossible," the letter continued, "but I've been here, Maya. When you talked to my photograph at 3 a.m., I heard every word. When you ate cereal for dinner because cooking felt too much like living, I wished I could hold you. When you threw away my sweaters last month and then cried for hours, I was the reason you found that one t-shirt behind the washing machine, the one that still smells like me. I put it where you'd find it." She remembered that shirt, remembered clutching it like a lifeline, remembered thinking it was a gift from the universe. Her apartment suddenly felt different, charged with a presence she dismissed as wishful thinking and grief-induced hallucinations. "I wrote these letters hoping to heal you, but I see now that I've only frightened you. That wasn't my intention. I love you too much to cause you more pain." The handwriting grew more erratic, the pen strokes deeper, more desperate. "This will be my last letter. I can feel myself fading, not into nothingness, but into whatever comes next. Perhaps holding on was selfish. Perhaps love isn't supposed to transcend death, no matter how much we will it to. I need you to live, truly live, and I don't think you can do that with a ghost writing you letters." Maya pressed the letter to her chest, feeling her heart fracture and heal and fracture again. Around her, the apartment felt hollow, as if something essential was already gone. The rain outside seemed softer now, less angry, like the sky itself was offering a gentle goodbye. "Know that every moment we shared was real," the letter concluded. "Know that you are worthy of love, from the living and the dead. Know that I would choose you in every lifetime, in every form existence might take. Find joy, my darling. Find peace. Find love again when you're ready. I'll be watching over you, but from a distance now, the way angels are supposed to." The rain drummed against my window as I stared at the photograph Marcus had given me, my hands trembling. The woman in the picture looked so familiar, yet I couldn't place her. Dark hair, kind eyes, standing beside a man who bore an unsettling resemblance to someone I'd seen before but couldn't quite remember. "Who is she?" I whispered into the empty apartment. Marcus had left hours ago, promising to return with more answers, but the silence was suffocating. I'd read the latest letter so many times the paper was beginning to wear thin at the creases. The handwriting had evolved again, becoming more hurried, more desperate. Whoever was writing these knew I was getting close. The photograph slipped from my fingers as a knock echoed through the apartment. Not the gentle rap Marcus used, but something urgent, almost frantic. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole to see Mrs. Chen from 3 Billions, her usually composed face etched with worry. "Sarah, dear, I need to speak with you," she said the moment I opened the door. Her accent was thicker than usual, betraying her agitation. "It's about the letters." My blood turned to ice. "What letters?" She pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. "Don't pretend with me, child. I've been watching. I've seen the envelopes under your door. I know what's happening here. Mrs. Chen, I don't understand." "Sit down." Her voice carried an authority I'd never heard before. "There are things you need to know about this building, about your apartment specifically." I remained standing, every instinct screaming at me to run. "How do you know about the letters?" She moved to my window, gazing out at the rain-soaked street below. "Because I've been seeing the same person coming and going, late at night, early in the morning. Always careful, always quiet. But I'm an old woman with insomnia and too much time on my hands." Who have you seen?" Mrs. Chen turned back to me, her expression grave. "The same woman from your photograph." The room tilted. I grabbed the back of my couch for support. "That's impossible. I don't even know who she is." "Her name was Elena Morrison. She lived in this apartment before you." The name hit me like a physical blow. Elena, the woman Marcus had mentioned, the one who died in the accident. But that didn't make sense. Dead people didn't deliver letters. "You're confused," I said, backing away from her. "Elena's dead. She died 3 years ago." Mrs. Chen's laugh was bitter. "That's what they told you, isn't it? That's what they wanted everyone to believe." The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. "What are you talking about?" "Elena Morrison didn't die in that accident, Sarah. She was badly injured, yes. Brain trauma, they said, but she survived." Mrs. Chen moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She's been in a private facility this whole time, a place her family could afford to keep her away from prying eyes. But why would they lie? Why would everyone think she was dead? Because it was easier. Because the truth was too complicated, too painful." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She escaped 2 weeks ago, the same time your letters started appearing." I stared at the paper she held out to me, a missing person flyer with Elena's photograph. The same woman from Marcus's picture, but this one was recent. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, but those same kind eyes stared back at me. "The brain injury," Mrs. Chen continued. "It affected her memory, her perception of time and relationships. The doctors said she became fixated on certain people, certain places. She believed..." Mrs. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "She believed she had a connection to whoever lived in this apartment." The letters suddenly made horrible sense. The intimate knowledge of my life, the way they seemed to peer into my soul. It wasn't divine intervention or supernatural awareness. It was the confused mind of a damaged woman who somehow believed she belonged here, with me. "Where is she now?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Still coming here. Still watching you. The facility has been searching, but she's clever. She knows how to hide, how to move through the building without being seen, except by old women who can't sleep." The photograph in my hand suddenly felt heavier, weighted with tragedy and delusion rather than mystery and romance. Elena wasn't my guardian angel. She was a broken woman, lost in her own fractured reality, and somehow I'd become the center of her confused world. "We need to call someone," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I heard the soft slide of paper beneath my door. Mrs. Chen and I stared at each other, then at the white envelope now lying on my threshold. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the building's shadows, Elena Morrison waited in her twilight world between memory and madness. The rain hammered against the windows of the coffee shop as Maya stared at Daniel across the small wooden table, her hands wrapped around her mug, seeking warmth that seemed impossible to find. The revelation about Father Martinez had left her feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out her insides with a rusty spoon. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Daniel said, his voice gentle but concerned. Maya almost laughed at the irony. "Maybe I have." She took a sip of her coffee, grimacing at its bitter taste. "Daniel, what do you know about divine intervention? About angels?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite a shift from discussing your mysterious letter writer. Are you feeling all right? Just humor me, please." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "I suppose I believe that sometimes the universe sends us what we need, when we need it. Whether you call that angels or fate or cosmic coincidence." He shrugged. "Why do you ask?" Before Maya could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, the cemetery. "Sunset, Section D, Row 15. Come alone if you want the truth." Her blood ran cold. "I have to go." "Maya, wait!" Daniel reached across the table, catching her wrist. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" She looked down at his hand on her arm, warm and real and solid. Part of her wanted to tell him everything about the letters, about Marcus, about Father Martinez's impossible claims. But how could she explain something she didn't understand herself? "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling away. "I just need some time to think." The drive to Oakwood Cemetery took 20 minutes through traffic that seemed determined to delay her. Maya's mind raced as she navigated the winding roads. Who had sent that text? Was it the same person writing the letters? And why the cemetery, a place that held nothing but painful memories? The sun was already low on the horizon when she arrived, casting long shadows between the weathered headstones. Section D was in the older part of the cemetery, where the markers were simple and the grass grew wild between the graves. Maya counted rows as she walked, her footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Row 15 was nearly empty, except for a few scattered graves and one figure standing at the far end. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, even after 5 years, she recognized that silhouette. Marcus? He turned at the sound of his name, and Maya felt the world tilt sideways. It was him, older, thinner, with hollow cheeks and eyes that held depths of sorrow she'd never seen before, but alive, impossibly, miraculously alive. "Hello, Maya." His voice was rougher than she remembered, worn like old leather. "You're dead." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I saw the accident. I was there. You died." Marcus stepped closer, and Maya noticed the way he moved, carefully, as if every step caused him pain. "I should have died. The doctors said it was impossible that I survived. Multiple organ failure, massive blood loss, brain trauma." He touched a scar that ran along his temple, disappearing into his hairline. "But here I am, the letters." Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "You've been writing the letters." "Yes." "For how long? How long have you been alive and letting me think?" Her voice broke. "How could you do this to me?" "Because I had to protect you." Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Maya, you don't understand what happened that night. The accident, it wasn't an accident." The cemetery seemed to spin around her. "What are you talking about?" "I was investigating something big. Corporate fraud, money laundering. It went all the way to the top of my firm. When I got too close to the truth, they tried to eliminate me." His eyes were haunted. "They would have come after you too. The only way to keep you safe was to let the world think I was dead." Maya sank down onto a nearby bench, her legs unable to support her anymore. 5 years, Marcus. 5 years I've been mourning you, blaming myself, falling apart piece by piece. I know." He sat beside her, careful to maintain distance. "I watched you. From afar, but I watched. Every day you struggled, every night you cried yourself to sleep. It killed me to see you suffer and not be able to comfort you. So you sent letters instead." Anger flared in her chest. "You thought anonymous notes would somehow make it better?" "I thought..." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. "I thought if I could guide you back to living, help you heal, Then maybe when it was finally safe to come forward, you could forgive me. Forgive you? Maya stood abruptly, pacing between the headstones. Marcus, I mourned you. I had a breakdown. I lost my job, my friends, everything that mattered to me. I know. His voice was broken. And I'm sorry. God, Maya, I'm so sorry. The coffee shop on 5th Street buzzed with afternoon energy, but Elena barely noticed the conversations flowing around her. She sat in the corner booth, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm mug, watching the door with nervous anticipation. The letter she'd found that morning lay open on the table before her, its familiar handwriting now feeling like a taunt. Meet me where we used to dream about our future. 3 p.m. It's time you knew everything. She'd recognized the location immediately, their old haunt from college, where she and Marcus had spent countless hours planning a life together that never came to pass. The irony wasn't lost on her that whoever had been orchestrating this elaborate revelation had chosen the very place where so many of her hopes had first taken root. The bell above the door chimed, and Elena's breath caught. But it wasn't Marcus who walked through. It was Dr. Sarah Chen, her therapist from 3 years ago. The woman Elena had trusted with her deepest traumas, her most vulnerable moments. Sarah's eyes found Elena's immediately, as if she'd known exactly where to look. She approached the table with measured steps, her expression a mixture of guilt and something that might have been relief. Hello, Elena. Sarah slid into the opposite seat without invitation, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Thank you for coming. Elena stared at her, pieces of a puzzle suddenly shifting in her mind. It was you. The words came out as barely a whisper. You've been writing the letters. Yes, Sarah's admission hung in the air between them like a confession, though not in the way you might think. How long? Elena's voice grew stronger, anger beginning to burn through the shock. How long have you been watching me, invading my privacy, playing God with my life? Sarah winced. Since our last session, when you stopped coming to therapy, I was worried. You were making progress, but you were also spiraling in ways that concerned me deeply. So you decided to stalk me instead of picking up the phone. I tried calling. I sent follow-up letters through proper channels. You ignored them all. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Elena, you were disappearing. I could see it happening. The isolation, the self-destructive patterns. When traditional methods failed, I made a choice that I knew was unethical, but felt was necessary. Elena's mind raced backward through months of mysterious correspondence, each letter perfectly timed to arrive when she needed it most. The things you wrote about, Marcus's death, my childhood, my father's abuse, how did you know those details? I never told you half of those things. A shadow passed over Sarah's features. Some of it came from our sessions, yes. But Elena, there's something else you need to understand. Something about why I became so invested in your case. The coffee shop seemed to fade around them as Sarah reached into her purse and withdrew a worn photograph. She placed it on the table, and Elena's world tilted sideways. It was Marcus, but younger, much younger. He stood next to a woman who looked remarkably like Sarah, both of them wearing graduation caps and gowns. Marcus was my brother, Sarah said quietly. My older brother, who died in a car accident on his way to see the woman he'd been planning to propose to. The woman he'd told me everything about. Her strength, her pain, her incredible capacity for love despite everything she'd endured. Elena's hands began to shake. That's impossible. Marcus never mentioned having a sister. We were estranged for several years before his death. A family dispute that seems so trivial now. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. When I started practicing therapy, I specialized in trauma because of what I'd learned about you through him. And then one day, 3 years ago, you walked into my office. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Every session, every breakthrough, every moment of vulnerability she'd shared, Sarah had known exactly who she was from the beginning. You used me, Elena breathed. You used my grief, my trust. I helped you, Sarah interrupted firmly. Or tried to. Yes, my motives were complicated. Yes, I crossed lines that should never be crossed. But Elena, everything I've done has been because Marcus loved you so much that he spent his final months talking about how to help you heal from wounds you'd never even told him about. Elena stared at the photograph, seeing Marcus's eyes reflected in his sister's face. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable once pointed out. The letters. They weren't just from you, were they? Some of those words, those phrases, they sounded like him. Sarah nodded, tears beginning to form. Marcus kept journals, pages and pages about you, about plans he had to help you work through your trauma. I used his words, his insights, his love for you to craft messages I thought might reach you when nothing else could. The coffee shop continued its afternoon rhythm around them, but Elena felt suspended in time, grappling with a truth that reframed everything she thought she knew about the past several months. The rain had stopped by the time Maya reached the cemetery gates, but the world still dripped with melancholy. Water clung to iron bars and marble headstones like tears that refused to fall. She clutched the latest letter in her trembling hand, the paper already soft from her sweaty palms and the lingering moisture in the air. The truth waits where memories sleep. Row 7, beneath the angel's wing. She had read those words a dozen times, each repetition sending fresh chills down her spine. This was different from the others. This letter hadn't appeared in her apartment. Instead, she'd found it slipped under her car windshield wiper that morning, as if whoever was writing them had grown tired of games and was ready for something more direct. Maya's footsteps echoed hollowly on the wet pavement as she wound through the cemetery paths. Row 7 stretched before her, a collection of weathered headstones and elaborate monuments that had seen decades of grief and remembrance. At the far end, a large marble angel stood sentinel over a modest grave, its wings spread wide as if preparing to lift the departed soul to heaven. As she approached, her breath caught in her throat. She recognized this place, the angel, the arrangement of nearby graves, the old oak tree whose branches cast dancing shadows across the memorial stones. She had been here before, though the memory felt distant and fragmented, like pieces of a dream she couldn't quite recall. The headstone beneath the angel's protective wingspan bore a name that made her knees weak. Margaret Chen, beloved mother and guardian, 1952 to 2019. Margaret. The name whispered through Maya's consciousness like a half-remembered song. She pressed her hand to her forehead, struggling to piece together fragments of memory that seemed to slip away the moment she tried to grasp them. An elderly woman's gentle smile, warm hands offering comfort during her darkest hours, a voice speaking words of encouragement when the world felt impossibly heavy. You remember her? Maya spun around to find a man standing several feet away, his presence so sudden and silent that he might have materialized from the shadows themselves. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his 30s, with dark hair touched by premature gray and eyes that held depths of sorrow she recognized all too well. "Who are you?" she whispered, though some part of her already knew. "My name is David Chen. Margaret was my mother." He stepped closer, and Maya could see the resemblance now. The same kind eyes, the same gentle slope of the shoulders, as if both mother and son had carried the weight of other people's pain. "She told me so much about you, Maya. Even at the end, when the cancer had taken almost everything else, she still spoke your name." The world tilted beneath Maya's feet. "I don't understand. I've never met your mother. I would remember." "The crisis helpline," David said softly. 3 years ago, when you called that night, the night you had planned to..." He paused, his voice catching. "My mother was the volunteer who answered. She stayed on the phone with you for 6 hours." The memory came flooding back with devastating clarity. The pills lined up on her bathroom counter like tiny white soldiers. The note she had written and rewritten until her hands shook too badly to hold the pen. The desperate, last-minute call to the crisis hotline, not really believing anyone could save her, but unable to take that final step alone. Margaret's voice had been a lifeline in the darkness, warm and steady and infinitely patient. She had talked Maya through that terrible night, sharing stories of her own struggles, her own moments of despair and the small mercies that had pulled her back from the edge. By morning, Maya had flushed the pills away and torn up the note, choosing to fight for another day. "She never forgot you," David continued, tears glistening in his eyes. "She carried a notebook filled with the names of people she had talked to, people she worried about. But you were different. She would check the obituaries every day, searching for your name and breathing a sigh of relief when she didn't find it." Maya's legs finally gave out, and she sank onto the stone bench beside Margaret's grave. "The letters," she whispered. "You've been writing the letters." David nodded, settling beside her with careful distance. "After Mom died, I found her notebooks. Pages and pages about you, about how she wished she could check on you, make sure you were okay. She had tried to find you, but the crisis center couldn't share information." He pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with Margaret's careful handwriting. "She asked me to watch over you if anything happened to her, so I did." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. All this time she had imagined some sinister stalker documenting her pain for twisted entertainment. Instead, it had been an act of love, a promise kept by a grieving son to his dying mother. "I know it was wrong," David said quietly, "but I couldn't let go. Watching you, making sure you were safe. It was the last connection I had to her." The rain hammered against the windows of Marcus's apartment as Elena stood frozen in his doorway, the final letter clutched in her trembling hands. The revelation that he was her mysterious correspondent had shattered something fundamental inside her, leaving her feeling more exposed than ever before. "How long?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Marcus closed his eyes, as if the weight of her question physically pained him. "Since the beginning. Since that first day I found you on the bridge." The memory hit her like a physical blow. 3 years ago, standing on the edge of the Riverside Bridge in the rain, contemplating an ending that seemed easier than continuing. She had been so lost in her grief, so consumed by the darkness that followed David's death, that she hadn't noticed the stranger who approached slowly, cautiously. "You said you were just walking by," she said, her voice growing stronger with anger. "You said it was coincidence." "I lied." Marcus stepped toward her, but she backed away. "I had been watching you for weeks before that night, following you, learning about you, learning about me." The words came out as a harsh laugh. "You mean stalking me?" "No, Elena, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Marcus?" She threw the letter at his feet. "Explain to me how watching someone without their knowledge, following them, breaking into their apartment to leave cryptic messages, isn't stalking." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, his composure finally cracking. "Because I loved you. Because from the moment I first saw you, I knew I would do anything to save you from yourself." "Save me?" Elena's voice rose to match the intensity of the storm outside. "I didn't need saving. I needed honesty. I needed truth. I needed someone who wouldn't manipulate me with elaborate games." "The letters weren't games," Marcus said desperately. "They were the only way I could reach you. You were so closed off, so determined to push everyone away. Every time I tried to get closer, you pulled back." Elena thought of all the moments over the past 3 years when Marcus had seemed to appear at exactly the right time. When she was struggling with a particularly dark day and he would text with an invitation to coffee. When she was drowning in memories of David and Marcus would suggest a walk or a movie. She had thought it was intuition, that he simply understood her better than anyone else. "The apartment," she said suddenly. "How did you get into my apartment?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. "The landlord," she continued, pieces clicking into place. "Mr. Chen always seemed to know when I was struggling, always checked on me at the strangest times." "You paid him, didn't you? You paid him to give you access." "Elena, please." "How much of my life is real, Marcus?" The question hung between them like a blade. How much of what I thought I was discovering about myself, working through, healing from, how much of that was actually you pulling strings behind the scenes? "The healing was all you," Marcus insisted. "I just provided guidance." "Guidance?" Elena laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it when you quote my private journal entries back to me? When you reference conversations I've never had with you? When you somehow know about nightmares I've never shared with another living soul? The color drained from Marcus's face. The journals were already in your apartment. I never took them, I just read them. And the other things, I could see how much you were hurting. I wanted to help. By violating my privacy in the most fundamental way possible. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't tell if they were from rage or heartbreak. By making me fall in love with a fantasy version of yourself while you puppeteered my emotional recovery? You fell in love with me, Marcus said quietly. Not a fantasy. Me. The real me. No. Elena shook her head. I fell in love with someone I thought chose to care about me. Someone I thought saw value in my broken pieces without needing to catalog and study them first. I fell in love with someone who loved me despite my flaws, not someone who fell in love with my flaws because he'd been obsessing over them for years. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood in the center of his living room, looking like a man watching his world collapse. And Elena realized that despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies and the violation of her most private moments, part of her still wanted to comfort him. That realization terrified her more than anything else. I need time, she said finally. I need space to figure out who I actually am when you're not orchestrating my life from the shadows. Marcus nodded, though she could see it was killing him. How long? Elena looked at this man she had loved, this stranger who knew her better than she knew herself, and felt something break inside her chest. I don't know. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the impossible image. Herself at age 7, standing beside a boy she'd never met, both of them laughing in what appeared to be her childhood backyard. The memory didn't exist in her mind, yet the evidence sat before her, undeniable. I don't understand, she whispered, looking up at Marcus, who stood frozen by the window. How is this possible? Marcus turned slowly, his face a mask of anguish she'd never seen before. Because I was there, Sarah. I've always been there. The room seemed to tilt around her. What do you mean, always? He moved toward her with careful steps, as if approaching a wounded animal. Do you remember when you were 7 and you got lost in the woods behind your house? You were gone for 6 hours, and when they found you, you said a boy had helped you find your way back. Sarah's breath caught. She did remember, vaguely, the terror of being lost, then suddenly feeling safe, guided by someone she couldn't quite see clearly. Her parents had dismissed it as an imaginary friend born of trauma. That was you, she said, the words barely audible. Marcus nodded, his eyes glistening. I found you crying by the old oak tree. You couldn't see me clearly then. Most children can't, not really. But I stayed with you until you were safe. Children can't see what? The question came out sharper than she intended. Marcus sat heavily in the chair across from her, suddenly looking decades older. Sarah, I'm not entirely human. Not anymore. The world stopped making sense. Sarah set the photograph down with shaking hands, her mind reeling. What are you saying? I died when I was 28, Marcus said quietly. Car accident, 1987. But instead of moving on, I was given a choice. I could stay, bound to this plane, to watch over someone who would need guidance. Someone whose life would be marked by profound loss and pain. Sarah's vision blurred. You're telling me you're some kind of guardian angel? Not an angel. Something more complicated than that. A soul caught between worlds, tethered to you. His voice broke slightly. I've watched you grow up, Sarah. I was there when your parents died, when David left, when you lost the baby. Every moment of pain, I felt it too, wanting desperately to help but bound by rules I couldn't break. She stood abruptly, pacing to the far side of the room. This is insane. You're telling me my entire life has been watched by a ghost? I'm telling you that you've never been alone, even when you thought you were. Marcus rose too, his hands outstretched. The letters, I started writing them when I couldn't bear to watch you suffer in silence anymore. I was breaking the rules, risking everything because you what? Sarah spun to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. Because I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air like a confession at an altar. Somewhere between watching you graduate college and seeing you help that homeless woman last winter. Somewhere between your midnight crying sessions and your stubborn determination to keep going despite everything, I fell completely impossibly in love with you. Sarah felt like she might collapse. How long have you been able to touch things, to be seen? It started about a year ago. The more I focused on you, the more solid I became in this world. But it's not sustainable, Sarah. Every day I exist like this, I'm stealing time from whatever comes next. She stared at him, this man who had somehow become the center of her universe, and tried to process the impossible truth. So what happens now? You just disappear? I don't know. Marcus stepped closer, and she didn't pull away. I've never heard of anyone like me lasting this long. But Sarah, you have to understand, everything I've done, everything I've risked, it was worth it to see you smile, to see you healing. I'm not healing, she said through her tears. I'm falling apart. No, you're not. You're braver than you know, stronger than you believe. You always have been. Marcus reached out tentatively, and when she didn't retreat, he cupped her face gently. The letters weren't meant to break you down. They were meant to show you that someone sees all of you and loves you anyway. Sarah leaned into his touch, her world reshaping itself around this impossible truth. What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to love someone who might vanish? I don't know, Marcus admitted. But I know that this, whatever we have, it's real. It matters. Outside, thunder rumbled ominously and the lights in the apartment flickered. Marcus looked toward the window with sudden concern. What is it? Sarah asked. I think, Marcus said slowly, my time might be running out faster than I thought. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Maya, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. Her footsteps echoed against sterile walls as she approached room 247. The number David had whispered through tears over the phone. Everything felt surreal, as if she were walking through someone else's nightmare. Through the small window in the door, she saw him first. David, slumped in a chair beside the bed, his usually pristine appearance disheveled. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes were red-rimmed from crying. But it was the figure in the bed that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Elena lay connected to a web of tubes and monitors, her face pale as moonlight against the stark white pillows. The steady beep of machines provided a rhythmic soundtrack to the scene, each sound a reminder that she was still alive, still fighting. Maya pushed open the door quietly. David looked up, his expression a mixture of relief and anguish when he saw her. "Thank you for coming," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know who else to call." She moved to the other side of the bed, taking in Elena's still form. "What happened?" "The doctors say it was an aneurysm. Sudden, catastrophic." David's hands trembled as he spoke. "She collapsed in her apartment yesterday evening. Her neighbor heard the fall and called for help." Maya stared down at the woman who had orchestrated so much of her life from the shadows. Even unconscious, Elena's face held traces of the determination that had driven her to watch over Maya for years. The resemblance Maya had noticed before seemed even more pronounced now, the shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw. "David," Maya said slowly, "there's something I need to know, something about Elena and me." He looked up sharply, wariness creeping into his eyes. "Maya, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." She kept her voice gentle but firm. "The letters, the way she's been watching me, the resemblance. David, please, I need the truth." For a long moment, the only sounds were the mechanical rhythms of life support. David's shoulders sagged as if a great weight was settling on them. "She never wanted you to know," he whispered finally. "She made me promise." Maya's heart began to race. "No what?" David reached across the bed and took Elena's hand, his fingers intertwining with her motionless ones. Elena is your mother, Maya, your birth mother. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She gripped the bed rail to steady herself as the room seemed to tilt around her. That's impossible. My mother died when I was 3, car accident. The woman who raised you, yes, but Elena, she gave birth to you when she was 17, unmarried, scared, with no family support. David's voice was barely audible. She made the hardest decision of her life and gave you to a couple who desperately wanted a child. The Thompsons adopted you legally, loved you completely, but Elena never stopped watching from afar. Maya felt as if she were drowning. Memories crashed over her in waves. The anonymous birthday gifts that had appeared throughout her childhood, the college scholarship from a mysterious foundation, the way Elena had seemed to know intimate details about her life. The letters, Maya breathed. After your adoptive parents died in the car accident, Elena wanted to reveal herself, to be there for you. But you were so lost, so angry at the world. She was terrified that learning the truth would destroy you completely. David's voice broke. So she found another way. The letters were her attempt to guide you, to help you heal, while staying in the shadows. Maya looked down at Elena's face, searching for traces of herself in the still features. She's been my guardian angel all along. She's been watching over you for 30 years, Maya. Every milestone, every heartbreak, every triumph. She has photo albums full of pictures taken from a distance. Your high school graduation, your wedding day, your first gallery showing. She knows more about your life than you might know yourself. Tears streamed down Maya's face as she reached out tentatively to touch Elena's hand. The skin was warm but unresponsive. Why didn't she ever tell me? Fear, David said simply. Fear that you'd hate her for giving you away. Fear that you'd reject her. Fear that knowing the truth would cause you more pain than comfort. He squeezed Elena's hand gently. She spent 3 decades loving you from a distance, Maya. The letters were her way of finally telling you everything she'd held inside. Maya sank into the visitor's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd learned. Her entire understanding of her life had shifted in an instant. The mysterious presence she'd sensed, the feeling of being watched and protected. It hadn't been divine intervention at all. It had been a mother's love, constant and unwavering despite the distance between them. Will she wake up? Maya asked, her voice small. David's silence was answer enough. The rain had stopped, but Maya's hands still trembled as she stood outside the cemetery gates. The metal was cold against her palms, and she could see her breath in the November air. Behind her, Daniel waited by his car, giving her the space she needed, but close enough that she felt his presence like an anchor. She hadn't been here in 3 years, not since the funeral that felt more like a fever dream than a real memory. The path to James's grave was etched in her mind, despite the time that had passed, muscle memory guiding her feet along the winding walkways between weathered headstones and plastic flowers. When she reached his marker, Maya nearly collapsed. The simple granite stone read James Michael Chen, beloved son and friend, but it was what lay beside it that stole her breath. A small stack of letters, protected by a clear plastic bag, weighted down with a smooth river rock. Her letters, the ones that had been appearing in her apartment. Maya knelt in the damp grass, her jeans immediately soaking through, and pulled the plastic bag toward her with shaking fingers. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to her in James's familiar handwriting. Some were yellowed with age, others looked freshly written. The dates on the postmarks spanned from just after his death to last week. She opened the topmost letter, the most recent one, and James's voice seemed to whisper from the paper. My dearest Maya, I know you've found them all now. I know you've been angry, confused, maybe even scared. I never wanted to frighten you. I just couldn't bear to watch you disappearing into yourself, becoming a ghost while you were still breathing. Her vision blurred as she continued reading. I've been visiting you, in ways I probably shouldn't have been able to. Don't ask me to explain how. I don't understand it myself. All I know is that love doesn't die with the body, and I couldn't move on knowing you were destroying yourself with guilt that was never yours to carry. A sob escaped her throat, and she felt Daniel's hand gently touch her shoulder. When had he approached? She hadn't heard his footsteps. The night I died, I was coming to tell you something. I'd been in love with you for months, maybe years, but I was too much of a coward to say it. I thought we had all the time in the world. The drunk driver didn't give me that chance, but Maya, please understand. What happened to me was not your fault. If you hadn't cancelled our dinner, if things had gone differently, I might have left 5 minutes later and still met the same fate. You can't carry that burden anymore. Maya pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the paper crinkle against her heart. Around them, the cemetery was silent except for the drip of water from bare tree branches. I've been leaving you breadcrumbs, hoping you'd find your way back to living. But I also wanted you to know that you're not alone. That man who's been helping you, Daniel, I led him to you. He was grieving too in his own way, and I thought maybe you could heal each other. Was I wrong to interfere? Maybe. But I couldn't stand by and watch you both suffer in isolation. She looked up at Daniel, who was reading over her shoulder, his expression a mixture of wonder and disbelief. The dreams you've been having, the sense that someone was watching over you, it was real. But Maya, I can't stay much longer. I've been holding on to this world because I was worried about you, but you're getting stronger now. You're starting to live again. That's all I ever wanted. The letter was nearly finished, and Maya could barely see through her tears to read the final lines. I need you to do something for me. I need you to forgive yourself. I need you to let me go. Not our friendship, not our memories, but this weight you've been carrying. And I need you to open your heart to the possibility of love again. You deserve it, Maya. You deserve everything beautiful this world has to offer. I'll always love you, but it's time for me to stop haunting you and time for you to stop haunting yourself. Live, Maya. Live loudly and fully and without apology. And maybe, when you're very old and it's your time to go, we'll see each other again. Until then, be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. Forever your friend and guardian, James. Maya clutched the letter as fresh tears streamed down her face. But, for the first time in years, they weren't tears of guilt or anguish. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of a grief that was finally clean and honest. Daniel knelt beside her in the wet grass and pulled her into his arms. She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his chest against her cheek, and whispered a goodbye into the November air. The apartment felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had contracted around the weight of truth. Sarah sat on her couch, the final letter clutched in trembling hands, Michael's words echoing in the silence between them. The golden afternoon light streaming through her window seemed to illuminate every dust mote, every imperfection, every moment that had led to this revelation. "How long?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How long have you been watching me?" Michael stood by the window, his back turned to her, shoulders rigid with the burden he'd carried alone. "Since the accident. Since the night I was supposed to die instead of live." The words hung in the air like a confession at an altar. Sarah's mind reeled, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed suddenly clicking into place. The man who'd appeared in her life just when she needed saving wasn't a coincidence. He was her creation, a guardian angel made flesh through sheer force of desperate need. "You were in the other car," she said, understanding flooding through her like ice water, the one that hit David. He turned then, and she saw tears streaming down his face. "I was drunk, angry, stupid. I ran the red light, and when I saw your husband's headlights, I knew," his voice cracked, "I knew I was going to kill someone innocent." The letter slipped from Sarah's fingers, floating to the floor like a dying leaf. Everything made horrible, beautiful sense now. The way he'd known exactly what to say, exactly when to appear. The way he'd understood her grief with an intimacy that had felt supernatural. It was supernatural, in its own devastating way. "But you survived," she said numbly. "Barely. And while I was lying in that hospital bed, while they were telling me about David Morrison, about his widow, about how he'd been coming home from buying groceries for a romantic dinner, I felt something break inside me. Not my ribs or my skull, though those broke too. Something deeper. Michael moved toward her slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. I started watching you, following you. At first it was guilt, just needing to see what I'd destroyed, but then it became something else. You were so broken, Sarah, and it was my fault. I thought if I could somehow fix me. The words came out sharp, cutting, like I was some project, some way to absolve yourself. No. He dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands reaching for hers before stopping mid-air, hovering in the space between contact and restraint. At first, maybe, but then I saw your strength. How you got up every morning even when breathing felt impossible. How you helped others at the grief support group while your own heart was shattered. How you found small moments of joy despite everything. Sarah stared at him. This man she'd fallen in love with. This stranger who'd stolen her husband's life and then inserted himself into hers. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The tenderness, equally so. The letters, she said, you've been writing them for 2 years. I know things about you that no one else knows because I've been there, in the shadows, watching over you. I saw you crying in grocery stores when couples walked by holding hands. I saw you talk to David's picture every night before bed. I saw you consider ending it all on that bridge last winter. Her breath caught. That night felt like a lifetime ago. The moment when grief had nearly consumed her entirely, when the weight of living without David had almost proved too much. She'd stood on the Morrison Bridge at 2 a.m, snow falling around her like a benediction, seriously considering whether the pain was worth enduring. You were there? I talked you down without you ever knowing it, pretended to be a drunk tourist asking for directions, made enough noise that you stepped back from the edge. The memory surfaced, a stumbling man with a thick accent, asking how to get back to his hotel. She'd been annoyed at the interruption, but it had broken the spell of that dark moment. By the time he'd wandered away, the immediate crisis had passed. Every letter was something I witnessed, Michael continued. Moments when you thought you were alone but weren't. Moments when you needed someone to see your pain and validate it. Because you owed me, Sarah said, understanding and anger warring in her chest. Because I loved you, he corrected softly. Somewhere in all that watching and protecting and hoping to heal what I'd broken, I fell completely in love with you. The apartment fell silent except for the sound of their breathing. Outside, life continued, cars passing, children playing, the world spinning on as it had before this moment of reckoning. But inside this small space, everything had changed. Sarah looked at Michael, really looked at him, seeing both the man who'd destroyed her life and the one who'd helped rebuild it. The impossibility of their situation stretched between them like a chasm neither could bridge. Yet somehow, impossibly, her heart was still beating.